One, two, 3.
4, 5, 6. Hello, I'm Michael D'Andrea, and this is another version of Taking It to the Streets. We're excited to be in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where we're going to have an interesting conversation with Shamant Thomas, a person who I've just recently met and who have found him to be interesting for a number of reasons. Specifically tonight, we're going to focus in on a couple of issues here. Your commitment and passion to deal with the academic racial gap in the United States, and very concretely some of the things that you're doing to help narrow that gap down. And then as we go around the country, we're always interested in how African American men are dealing with the issue of racism in our society. And racism is a big part of the academic achievement gap in the United States, and it's institutionalized. So maybe we can start off the conversation. I know you have a rich and varied background, and I'd like you to introduce yourself to the audience so they get to know you a little bit.
Okay, again, my name is Shamant Thomas. I am a proponent for education, particularly with African Americans. I went to a predominantly white school district growing up. I lived in the inner city of Milwaukee, and I started off going to some of the inner city schools, and my mom realized that that was probably not the best thing for me. So she enrolled me in what we call the 220 program in Wisconsin. So I was one of the inaugural students that started going out to the Germantown school district where I went. So from 4th grade all the way through 12th grade, I was out in Germantown. I was bused from the inner city out to the suburban schools. It was hard when I first got out there just because of the learning gap. So I was behind. I was put in classes that I had to work really hard to get out of those particular classes, some remedial classes and things like that. But I was able to persevere, and I was pretty successful. Upon graduation, I ended up going to Southern University and A&M College in Baton Rouge, Louisiana on a track scholarship. And I graduated in 4.5 years. And then I went back to school and got my master's in history from Southern University.
And what was your bachelor's in?
Psychology.
Psychology. Okay, there's a lot of folks out here that are smiling right now.
Yes. It was, I had a professor, he was Dr. Reginald Rackley. He was my favorite teacher. He was a mentor. He was one of my father figures that I had when I was in school. And his social psychology class is the one that really got me going with psychology. And I took it and I ran, and I didn't do too bad with it.
You must have done very well, because you moved on to get your master's.
Yes.
Good for you.
Yes.
Good for you. And where are you living now?
I'm back in Milwaukee. Well, I shouldn't say that. I stay in the suburbs of Milwaukee, which is Sussex, Wisconsin. Just probably about 15 minutes outside of the city. But I teach and work in the inner city of Milwaukee right now.
So the challenges that you faced early on, from 4th grade to 12th grade, and the realization of your own unique genius as you moved in advance, they must have been major factors in you choosing the path that you're on right now in your work world.
Well, ironically, I come from a educationally driven family. I'm actually a 3rd generation college graduate. My grandmother went to Alabama State University. So if you think back to how my grandmother was, she's passed away since then, but she was in school at Alabama State during the 40s. And then, so then you have my mom and my dad, who went to Lincoln University in Jefferson City, Missouri. They took me with them when they went to school. So that's all I saw. Was I saw my grandmother teaching. She was a kindergarten teacher. I saw my parents go to school and graduate. Yes, they struggled, but they managed their way through. And myself, when I that's all I knew. I knew that I was going to go to college. I wasn't interested in the service. I wasn't interested in the trade. I was, Shimon, you were going to go to college. And that was my goal. Whichever college it was, I got there.
And you sound like you've had a lot of success and a lot of pleasure and a lot of lifelong learning. What's driving you to do the work you're doing with this important at-risk population of African Americans who are such a large part of the gap, the academic achievement gap?
Well, I look at myself. I look at the situation that I ran into in school where I had teachers literally try to hold me back because they felt like, not because of my academic wherewithal, but because of the way that my parents dressed me going to school. And they said that I might be intimidating to other students because of things that they might not have been able to. I might have had clothing or things that they were not able to afford. So a teacher literally, my third grade teacher literally tried to hold me back because of that as somewhat of a punishment.
Really?
Yeah.
Whoa. Whoa.
So that right there is, to me, like a racial stereotype that my parents, who were not necessarily wealthy, but they always made sure that I dressed well and was presentable, that I knew how to speak well when it came to anybody I met. So,
and if they had held you back, your track may have gone in a different way.
Could have been completely different.
But you just sustained and moved forward. Do you feel like this sort of educational racism in our schools continues to persist?
Definitely. My daughter ran into a similar situation, not because of the way that she dressed, but the school that she was going to in kindergarten. She was supposed to be afforded the opportunity to go to what we call the quote unquote reading room, and they did not allow her to go. They didn't allow her to go to the reading room to help enhance her reading abilities, and so they kept her in the classroom where the other kids got to go to the reading room, and it unfortunately put her behind for whatever reason.
What was the rationale?
To this day we really don't know. We don't know. It's unfortunate, but she since then has caught up. And she's on par or maybe even above where other children are at her level.
Unfortunate, though, to have to go through that experience, because we're supposed to be a nation of equal treatment.
Correct.
Right? And helping people to realize their potential. Exactly what are you doing now in this school?
I am I teach 9th grade world history right now in a predominantly African American school. It's a charter school of Milwaukee Public Schools. But on top of being a teacher, I'm also a mentor, a counselor, a father figure, whatever it is that these kids need at the time. So,
what do you find are some of the common needs that you help fill that you're a little bit surprised at?
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily a surprise, but these kids that we have, a lot of times they just need somebody to talk to them. They need somebody that is there to listen to them. Because the reality is, if you can get them to trust you, these kids will go through the wall for you. And they'll try. And a lot of times that's all they're looking for, is just for somebody to say, Johnny, you can do this, and then you push them forward and they'll go, like I said, they'll go through the wall for you.
So building trust is being there to be a listener.
Yes.
But at the same time, I just heard you say not only a listener, but someone that is really encouraging to say, Johnny, you can go somewhere now.
Right.
Okay. Now, how do you think that would work in terms of building trust if you were a white teacher in a predominantly black school?
It's going to be. I think it's going to be difficult because these kids, where they come from within the inner city, they're going to question, how is it that you even relate to me? Not saying it can't be done, but what are you doing to make yourself understand where it is that I come from? Are you that teacher who yells at students because their heads down, or did you really take the time to find out, well, why is Johnny's head down? Maybe Johnny was up all night because he was raising his brothers and sisters when mommy and daddy were out doing who knows what, and I'm tired in the morning because I had to make sure that my baby brother was taken care of.
That's a really good concrete example of just extending care. And if I can kind of paraphrase it again, because I'd really like the audience to catch that, is to really step back and wonder why a student, particularly a student of color, might be having his head or her head down on the table, might be as important a reason as you just said, raising their brothers and sisters when mom and dad are doing something else.
I've had the conversation with a lot of my friends where we talk about there's so many other issues that go on prior to the student even getting to the school. Mm-hmm. Do they have the clothes to be able that they need to wear to get to school? Did they eat breakfast? Were they up all night? You don't know what their parents might have been doing. You don't know what they might have seen the night before. It's all kinds of different things that come up that play a factor into what's going on with these kids once they get to school.
So giving them the inspiration, the support, the care are really keys to helping them get motivated. How about in the classroom? Let's talk about classroom management, not in the traditional way of looking at punishment, discipline, and that kind of stuff, but how do you manage your students so that not just one student feels the inspiration, but you create a community in the classroom of connection, of care? How do you do that?
Well, I think one of the best techniques that I use, and you have to remember that every student is different, so you have to be able to reach them different ways. But one of the ways that I'll talk to them is I'll pull them aside instead of trying to embarrass them or talk to them in front of the entire class. I'll pull them aside and just let them know, I know this is not you. I know that you are. You can do so much better. I'll say I need you to be one of my leaders in class. So you're giving them responsibility. When they get responsibility, then they're more willing to do what's right or to try to help control the rest of the class. So it's just small things that you can do to, maybe that's the psychology part of me, that you can do to get them to be on your team. And keep the class in order.
You know, we have educators that are watching this conversation we're having, and we have counselors, school counselors that are listening to this conversation. And I guess I'm wondering, how many of the teachers watching this video or counselors have utilized exactly the techniques you're saying? By a counselor talking to a teacher, really encouraging the teacher not to publicly, in front of other students, reprimand a student, but pull them aside. And then add to that, not only pull them aside, but to explain to them that you really want them to be a leader in this class and they have responsibility that goes beyond themselves. They sound so simple, but I bet there's a number of people that are nodding their heads as we carry on this conversation saying, yeah, those are good ideas.
Right, there's different things that you could do. You can get them, for some reason, kids like to come up to the board and write. So if you have a kid who if you can get them to come up and write, or what I've noticed in my classes is they like to read out loud, even the ones who struggle. They'll try, and as you just have to continue to encourage them, that it's okay. Or if they like extra credit points, they'll work. If you have candy, there are different techniques. If you get an answer right, or just for trying, well, here's a Reese's cup or something like that. It's positive motivation that you can use to get them to participate and do the things that you want them to do.
As you're talking, I'm mindful of a leader in the black community who often talked about the differences between kids in class, oftentimes talking about African American kids. And I remember him saying that, with African American kids in our schools, too often they are first looked at about their handicaps that are revealed in the classroom. And a little time is spent on looking at the genius of these kids that's concealed. Just the opposite for white kids. Really looking at kids in predominantly white schools where folks see their genius that's readily revealed and their handicaps seem to be concealed going on. So you're kind of working in a way that really unveils the genius in kids. If they have a proclivity to write on the board, make the board available where they express their genius in that way. If they want to read, even if they can't read always accurately, they enjoy reading, kind of doing that way.
One of the projects that we just finished working on was we had a African American Dynasty project where I gave them 12 African dynasties, 12 African queens, and 12 African kings, and I let them choose. I put them in groups. I chose the groups, and they worked on that project. They got to choose one of those particular entities, and when I gave them complete autonomy on however they wanted to present that information. Only thing I said is, I need to have a paper, a small research paper, to their level, from that they needed to submit to me. And the work that I got PowerPoints, I got the trifold boards, I got some kids were acting out a particular scene. Some people showed different slides from Shaka Zulu. It was interesting just to see.
Just on their own.
On their own.
Yeah, really interesting. The creativity just coming out.
Yes.
What does that do from your observation of kids' racial identity development?
Well, at the school that I teach at, Universal Academy for the College Bound, every day we call our young scholars either kings or queens.
That's great.
So
that's great.
So, and that was the reason. That's what led me to come up with the African Dynasty Project. Well, let's find out why we call each other kings and queens. Because there's so many people that just go to slavery as that's where African or black history started. We were kings and queens before slavery started. So from that standpoint, let's find out what actually happened. What happened to these kings and queens, and how did that transition into slavery, and then how did that transition into what was going on with the African diaspora, and then everybody coming when we get to the United States, or even other parts of the other country. How did that lead us into, as far up to the 60s with the civil rights movement, and even what's going on now with Black Lives Matter? Why are we, how did all of this stuff happen? But before all of that, we were kings and queens.
Really a good foundation.
Yes.
How do the kids relate to what's happening now?
I don't think they get it. In all honesty, I don't think they see it happening, and they think this is a part of everyday life. This is just a part of how this is what happens.
And are you talking about the violence that's pervasive in our
specifically
society?
About the violence. So what I try to do is I try to show them more positive figures. I try to show them Barack Obama, and you may not agree with all of his policies, but look what he accomplished. Look at what Condoleezza Rice accomplished. She, although you may not agree with her being a Republican, it's still phenomenal as a African American woman. Look at the Attorney General. I believe her last name is Lynch. It's powerful things that we've accomplished, and I try to show them this. We can accomplish so many things when we are focused and put our minds to it.
I really like how you transcend political parties when you do that, and interject. You may not agree with what Barack Obama has done, but look at what he's accomplished.
Right.
And that becomes a real concrete model for folks that are going on. What is the violence like in the black community here in Milwaukee?
It's one of the worst in the country. It's literally one of the worst in the country. They may not necessarily publicize what's going on the national news, but it's terrible. You have kids that cannot walk down the street without hearing gunshots. Last year, I believe there was a little baby that was sitting on their grandfather's lap and was shot.
A drive-by?
It was a drive-by, shot through the window, and it's unfortunate.
Now, on top of that, you have more and more media attention on police officers and security guards that are being taped.
Yes.
Shooting, sometimes right in the back, or handcuffed. What are these kids making sense of that?
I think my opinion is that they think that this is everyday life. And my goal as a teacher, and the teachers that I work with, is to show them that this is not how the real world is supposed to be. This is not the way it was intended to be. We, as a school, have a philosophy that we're not going to have metal detectors at the door. We want you to know that this is a safe place for you to come.
Do you have metal detectors at the door?
There are no metal detectors at our door.
And it's explained to the kids why there's no metal detectors?
We told them that this is going to be a place that you're going to be able to come and be successful. You're not going to have to worry about the foolishness that goes on. And we've had very few incidents when it's come to violence.
That must be a relief for kids to find a safe place like that.
It is, because what we found out is there were kids who did not agree with the way that we operated as a school, and they left. And they went to some of these schools that they have to go through metal detectors. They have to deal with kids who maybe really don't even care, and then they come back and say, "Can we come back?" But you know what? You left, and that spot's been filled. So now you have to try again at the end of the semester, or at the end of or the beginning of next year, if you want to come back.
An important lesson.
It's a very important lesson. The grass is not always greener on the other side.
How's the parent participation in a school like that, where you start off by indicating the students are kings and queens?
The parents truly do appreciate it. I've had parents say that they really wanted their kids to know about African American history. There are some who they said that they never got that in schools. That they wish they would have been able to learn about, who King Tut was, who Cleopatra was, who Mansa Musa was. Who are these people? And they are almost envious of their kids that they get an opportunity to learn that. So one of the questions that I had for my kids was, at the end of this project, do you feel like you can teach this to somebody else?
Good question.
A lot of them, they were like, yes, my parents helped me out. They loved learning about who Queen Ty was, or who these different, like I said, African, kings and queens were. Who were the Ashanti tribe? What went on back then? It was phenomenal. It was a very good project that we had.
I wanna pause and just reiterate that technique, because when we do psychoeducational training in the classroom with conflict resolution or anger management or the different psychological life skills that are real important, I loved what you just said to the students, which is, okay, now that we finish this, do you feel like you could teach someone else about that? Another really interesting technique. And for those kids that look you in the eye and say, yes, I think I can, it's another form of empowerment.
Yes. One of the first projects we did when the school year started was we talked about culture and just different ethnicities. Everybody is different. So I had a flag project. So the project was, you got to pick a small flag out of my brown paper bag, and only country that they could not choose
was the United States,
because we're here. So, and some of them were frustrated because they didn't know where Costa Rica was, or they didn't know where Italy was. But when they began to learn about that particular place, and I said, well, do you think you want to visit there? And some of them were like, yeah. The only thing they know about is, or at the time, they would say, well, I want Jamaica, or I want the Bahamas. Could I have the United States? No, you cannot.
Right.
It's whatever you pull. You never know when you may end up gaining great wealth and just decide, well, you know what? In Mr. Thomas' class, I remember learning about this country. Let's go to I don't know, Australia. So
it opened their minds.
It opened the minds. That was the whole purpose for that, to start the year off.
We talked a little bit about your unique, and everyone has a unique story in their own family upbringing. You talked about concern about the violence in the Milwaukee community. You talked about concern about the violence and going on in the epidemic of law enforcement violence, which has been going on for years. The only difference now is we can videotape what's going on.
Correct.
On a personal level, what was it like for you, beyond your family, to grow up in this country as a intelligent, motivated person of color?
It's funny you say that. I talked to my wife about this a lot. and I tell my students this, that we as black males, specifically black males, I'm considered a threat, educated or not. And when you sit and think about it, it to me it makes so much sense. If I was not educated, then the first thing somebody's going to try to do is throw me into prison. But being educated, people will try to hold me back from attaining, you know, whatever, being the president of the United States. I mean, look at what goes on with President Barack Obama.
Huge symbol of hope.
He's, you know, a brilliant man.
Yes,
like I
he
said,
is.
you may not agree with his policies, but
you can't deny his brilliance.
You can't deny his brilliance. You know, and look at his wife. His wife actually was the breadwinner prior to him, you know, becoming president.
$350,000 a year.
Yeah,
how is that?
Right. So you know, she's brilliant in her own mind, and she's taking a back seat because of the office that her husband has. So you know, and he's considered a threat. So many people disagree with him because of his policies or philosophy, and I don't agree with everything that he says. Some things I do, but he's considered a threat. But at the same time, there are so many blacks that are in prison. We continue to build these prisons and not more institutions of higher learning. Why? That's the question that we have as a black community, is that to be able to put more blacks into the penitentiary.
Let's say it is. Let's go a step farther then. If I said to you, we have a society, like any society, that has a certain type of organization.
Right.
And in that organization, we have people that are at the top and people at the bottom. And if I were to say to you that the people at the top are becoming fewer in number as the number of non-white folks increase, and there's this unprecedented phenomena where white people, either consciously or unconsciously, recognize that the demography of the United States is changing in an unprecedented way. So I would think that it's possible that the threat of losing their privilege as the dominant racial group in society leads to a strong unconscious feeling of being threatened, particularly by black men. Is that something you think is a plausible rationale?
I don't think it's unconscious. I think they're conscientiously trying to do it.
In order to maintain their status and privilege.
Maintain the status and privilege.
Do you think that view, as you kind of interact in your own personal sphere with other African Americans, that's a kind of a shared idea that this is a conscious?
Yes.
Wow, that undermines the whole feeling of trust and equality and really leads to a sick society.
Are we really equal?
No.
In this society?
Absolutely not.
So.
And I would tend to, you know, I'm glad that you said it, because I tend to agree there's a lot of consciousness going on in the racial injustices. The blatant one is the police violence. When you're handcuffed and you're shot in the back. You're running away, you get shot in the back. You're beaten up so much that you're broken, literally broken all your bones in your body, and then taken on one of those bumpity rides in the police car. And it doesn't always have to be white people who are conscious of that. I believe that there's this internalized racism that people can treat other people of the same racial group in negative and mean-spirited ways.
You mean as far as like black on black? Or Hispanic on Hispanic? That happens. That happens within our community. It's unfortunate. We talk about the social elite. If you have, I guess, quote unquote, made it? What are you doing to help bring up or build the bridge to help bring your other brethren up?
I worked for 10 years at Meharry Medical College, a predominantly African American community, and all professional African Americans, you know, from psychiatry to OBGYN, and that was a common conversation. What are we giving back to the community? and you can see some were really giving back a ton, others were not going on. Now you're a man who seems to embody a sense of hopefulness that is contagious to the students you work with.
Try to.
Are you hopeful about our future overall?
Yes, I am hopeful because at least what I try to do and many of my peers is we try to show these young kings and queens that you have options. You have an option to go to college or to go to the service or to go get a trade or to start your own business. You have an option. That's what we try to do at my school, which is why I love it to death. Our kids, a lot of times they just need to know that there's somebody who's backing them, and with continuously doing that, there may be some that may fall by the wayside, and that's unfortunate. But there's going to be so many that we are reaching that are going to succeed.
Sometimes the roadblocks seem impossible to move beyond without some sort of more direct action. Dr. King, Malcolm X, and others talked about organizing communities where civil disobedience becomes an important tool to promote justice and health in a community. Just recently, the University of Missouri had this really interesting unity, mainly of African American students, 7% of the 35,000 African American. The entire football team said, we're going to support the call for the resignation of the president. Are those appropriate actions, not only for individuals to take, but for educators and counselors and psychologists to support by being present? Is that appropriate?
I think they have every right to do that.
Why do you say that?
Nobody has an issue when you have athletes who are getting paid when they say you're not paying us or you're not doing things the right way as the NFL or Major League Baseball, and we're not going to take that, so we strike. There's no difference. So basically, these athletes went on strike and said, we're not going to be subjected to this particular leadership if you're not going to back us from this racial situation that has happened on campus. To me, there's no difference.
There seems to be an increasing, at least maybe I just see this, maybe you disagree with it, but to me there seems to be an increase among young people in our colleges, predominantly Hispanic, predominantly African American, and other people of color who are getting united, whether it's working against the sweatshops, you know, that capitalism kind of uses as a tool to keep people oppressed, to make high profits in this country, whether it has to do with the environment and the threat it has to humanity in general, whether it has to do with racism. It seems like the new generation is sparking and connecting. Is that something you see happening, or is that just my take on things?
No, again, being a history teacher, the more things change, the more they stay the same. So it's almost like another civil rights movement. Again, one of the things that I've talked to my students about, during our summer bridge program, we talked about the Declaration of Independence and what does that mean as far as us as a society. And then we looked at the Gettysburg Address and what were they fighting for. So what were we fighting for with the Declaration of Independence? What were we fighting for with the Gettysburg Address? And how did that change? And then I took those two documents, or those two that document and that speech, and I said, look at Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. They all coincide.
Connected.
They all connect, and they all coincide.
What are the students' responses when I mean, that sounds like a powerful thing. What are the students' response?
They, a lot of them were in awe that Martin Luther King took different parts from the Declaration of Independence, as well as the Gettysburg Address, and incorporated that into his speech. And so my question for them is, or I guess the statement that I said, I said was, the more things change, the more they stay the same. So we continue. The Declaration of Independence we fought for our freedom. The Gettysburg Address with the Civil War.
The emancipation.
Right. We were fighting for, I don't want to say freedom, but we were fighting for a union to be for the opportunity for everybody to be together as a country. So we were not going to secede. So then we fast forward to the 60s, and we're fighting for rights, for civil rights. And now we're in 2015, and we're saying that these Black Lives Matter. In essence, it's all
very
the same.
interesting.
It's
very
all
interesting.
the same with the correlation.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about the Black Lives Matter. Are the kids talking about that?
Not as much as you think.
So you have to initiate it.
You have to initiate it. I mean, they see it. I'm sure that they're familiar with it because they're on the internet. They see things on Facebook. So they see it, and they see it on BET or whatever channels that they predominantly watch. So they do see it. They're familiar with it, but I don't see them talking about it.
So it's good that there are people in schools that can talk about it.
Yes.
Now, how about people your own age? What is their reaction to the Black Lives Matter movement over here? Now you have increasing numbers of white people saying, hey, wait a minute. Not just Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. But I think what they're saying is white lives matter. What is your take on these two movements?
Well, again, when we sit and we talk about Black Lives Matter, and it seems to be opposition with that statement. Like you said, some people say that all lives matter, but did anybody say that when you had these young men being gunned down with stand your right? Is it stand your right? Stand your ground. Stand your ground.
That's right. Stand your ground.
Stand your ground.
That's right.
So was somebody saying that then? That everybody's lives matter. It didn't seem like it.
No, it didn't.
It didn't seem like it with that. And I can't, off the top of my head, I can't think of everybody that has recently just been gunned down or